Hello, my name is Selena Griffin and I'm here to talk to you about the first year of my doctorate in education at the Open University, where I'm studying, well, my current title, of course it may change, is here. So I'm looking at research into Toastmasters and I've just completed my first year. So Cross, this is my cat, Mr. Grebo, who is involved in everything I do at the moment, whether I want him to be or not. But paws crossed, I get into the second year and so on and can carry on with my research. A little bit about me, I've worked in data for many years, and when I think back through my past, one of the work experiences I enjoyed the most was when I worked at the University of Oxford doing fundraising, and it was quite common practice in the US, but it wasn't happening particularly in the UK. But I was able to develop predictive models against our database of around 200,000 alumni and friends to score all of the non-donors to who looked most like one of the existing donors in the system. So I came up with predictive models to do this and revolutionized the way that the Central University did direct mails at the time. It was very successful in terms of amount of money raised, return on investment, and keeping the actual costs down. But on a personal point of view, it was an exercise that I just really enjoyed doing, like digging into the data set, looking at all the variables, trying to think what might happen, which variables might be relevant, and then coming up with the models. It was something I really, really enjoyed. My area of research is Toastmasters International, a public speaking and leadership organisation. And straight away, this puts a huge amount of pressure on me because I'm giving a presentation about my research into a public speaking organisation. So there's a really high bar for me already there. Toastmasters I've been involved with for around 6 years, I think now. It's an international organisation headquartered in the United States. It's been going over 100 years, and how it works is that there are many different clubs all over the world which are run by more experienced members, Toastmasters. I'm one myself, I'm a club leader, and members go to those clubs and deliver speeches and work through projects and take on roles to develop themselves personally, but also to progress through the Toastmasters educational program. A few stats here, so you can see it's quite a large organisation, over 364,000 members across the world, very popular in the Americas, less so in Europe, but still significant numbers. From an alumni survey here, you can see this looks really positive, doesn't it? Willingness to recommend Toastmasters, 8.8 out of 10. And 93.7% of members said that Toastmasters has helped me meet my goals. That sounds really, really positive and really successful. There's a few stats there on the questionnaire, and I think there was I can't remember now, it was around 900 or 1,000 responses that came up with this. But this isn't interesting to me because there's a very positive picture here, but if we go back to these other statistics, we can see the retention rate is actually only a little bit over 50%. So that's a bit of a mismatch. If people recommend it and think it helped them achieve their goals, why are they not staying? And although I'm looking at this issue through a Toastmasters lens, I recognise the fact that this isn't a problem exclusive to Toastmasters. It's something that happens in a lot of professional organisations and clubs and those kinds of things. The starting point for this research is the introduction of pathways. So the Toastmasters educational programme was unchanged for about 50 years. And then in 2010, Toastmasters International decided to change it and bring in a new system. And Pathways was properly implemented in June 2020. And what It's changed the structure of the qualifications that you achieve on the educational program, but most importantly, it's moved everything from paper-based manuals to a learning management system. You still go into your club, and deliver your speech as a member to your fellow members and receive feedback and run meetings and all that kind of stuff. But whereas before you would do that in conjunction with a paper manual, now you must log on to the learning management system and work through the projects on the learning management system. So for someone like me, this is really exciting because straight away we've now got access to a phenomenal amount of data about how members are interacting and using the system and the educational materials that we've never had before. Before that, the only thing that Toastmasters HQ could see was when you became a member, maybe a year in-ish, you got a qualification, and then maybe you stopped being a member, or you paid your membership again and carried on being a member. But that was it. It was just those few points scattered out along an enormous range of time. But now, with people going into the learning management system and interacting with the materials, there's suddenly a load of data here. And to me, that's really exciting. So what I'm thinking about is predictive modelling. Can I use this trace data that exists now in the Toastmasters learning management system to create predictive models that will indicate to staff and headquarters which members look like they might be losing interest or they might be dropping out of Toastmasters International? Now, because this is my first year, I haven't actually got my grubby little mitts on any of the data yet. So I haven't done any studies. I hope to do that next year. But what I have done is a big literature review. The URL here as my website, that shows the full references of the references that I've put in this presentation. Obviously, I use many more for my actual literature review, but these are the ones that I'm talking about. For my literature review, the first thing that I looked at was the literature on Toastmasters International. So I was looking at academic journals, papers for what they said about Toastmasters International, anything about Toastmasters. As you can imagine, there wasn't actually a lot. What there was often just a throwaway reference, perhaps in the author's biography, or just using Toastmasters can help your public speaking skills. There weren't that many studies. However, I did find a few, the ones that I found most interesting. There's a couple here that looked at changing English as a foreign language classes, changing the structure and the pedagogy of those classes at university by bringing in elements of Toastmasters. So treating students as Toastmaster members, giving them roles, speeches, and a lot of peer feedback. So it wasn't teacher-centred, it was student-centred learning with the students giving each other feedback and evaluations, which happens in Toastmasters meetings. Another example is a public relations class, also at university. Shadinger inherited the class format from a previous teacher. It wasn't, a lot of people were failing the class, so they changed it and brought in lots of, again, Toastmasters pedagogy, people having different roles, peer review, student-centred, all this business. And the Shadinger study actually has some statistics where it shows you over the number of years the number of people passing the class when it was being conducted in this way increasing. But generally speaking, these studies are quite anecdotal. People are saying, I found it beneficial, it really helped me, but there's not a lot of robust research, robust data behind these inquiries. It's generally just anecdotal. There's also a doctoral thesis that I found by a Toastmaster himself that looked directly into retention, and that was one that I referenced quite a lot as well. So I widened my search a bit more to look at general research on communications training, and there wasn't much on communications training, particularly thinking about learning analytics or retention in communications training, which I expected, but I still needed to check. There were two studies I found that were interesting again. One was looking at the training of clergy in public speaking, and one was sending university staff to a public speaking course and seeing how that improved their public speaking. And again, like with the Toastmasters studies, it was very much anecdotal. It was very much, yay, we thought we did better. We enjoyed it. And these courses were a short duration as well. They were a fixed period in time. It wasn't like Toastmasters where you join and hopefully you stay for many, many years, because it's a program of professional development. Getting into more of the data side of things now, I turned my attention to predictive models and retention. But we can't think about retention without thinking about intention. In higher education, it's most likely that students are signing up for a particular outcome. They want to achieve that degree. With something like Toastmasters, that intention isn't as clear. Perhaps someone wants to give a best man speech and they want to feel more confident. Perhaps they're new to an area and want to make friends. It's more akin to what we see behind MOOCs, why people sign up for MOOCs. Sometimes it's a mild curiosity, it's an interest, they want to focus on one particular aspect, or they want to build their confidence. They're not necessarily striving for the same outcome that the person on the other end of the data who wants to retain them is looking at, if you like. I've got here a few examples. Study at Purdue University, Core Signals by Arnold and Pistole, is still cited today. So that was back in 2012. It was a large scale study, and you can see I've got a couple of literature reviews here where they analyse papers on predictive learning analytics. And generally speaking, the findings were quite mixed actually, but what the two studies agreed with, there was a lack of robust, large-scale evidence. And that's one of the reasons that the Arnold and Pistole study is still very much cited today, because it is one of the rare examples of a large-scale study, even though it was many years ago now. This is another really interesting aspect, self-assessment data. So Ellis et al. Did a study where self-assessment data from the students themselves was combined with trace data from the system. So what you're getting here is their intention, the self-assessment data, how they think, what they thought they would do, and then the reality, what actually happened in the trace data. And combining those two sets was led to more accurate models than looking at either set individually. So it adds additional dimensions to these models. Tomset, in a study of social workers and their communication skills, also found that it could be used as a proxy for competence. People who were self-assessing themselves as good communicators, actually, when they were evaluated, were usually better communicators than those self-assessing themselves as low. And this is really exciting to me about pathways. Suddenly in pathways, we ask Toastmasters when they're doing the projects to assess their skills before and after every single project. And this is such an exciting data set to me. I can't wait to get stuck into this, because I think we're going to see some really interesting groups of people here. People who assess them, they think they're really good, and they're not necessarily seeing an improvement after doing the projects. And then people who assess themselves as really poor before, but hopefully after completing the projects, their self-assessment goes up. And I think these are going to be two really different, really interesting masters. So there is a big diversity of members in Toastmasters itself, and actually looking at your data set in clusters rather than as a big mass can improve predictions very much and create more accurate, actionable insights about how to interact with what you're seeing by clustering the groups rather than treating them as a mass. So we can cluster not just on their trace data for those that engage or don't engage, but also on their behaviours and characteristics of the learners themselves. What now? Our predictive model has predicted who we think needs retaining. What do we do now? We have to do something with that information. So another aspect of interest to me for my literature review was studying intervention. Now, there aren't actually many studies that look at intervention. Normally the studies are more concerned with the prediction. But the team for OU, Open University Analyze, have looked into intervention. There's a couple of studies here. One, when the tutors that used the OU Analyze system more had more successful students. But what did they do? What was the intervention they were doing? What was the intervention? What did it look like? And then another study a bit later took a band of that predictive model and essentially got administrators to perform an intervention. There were two groups, a control group and in the same predicted band, the experimental group. The experimental group had an intervention from the administrator and they were more successful than the control group that received no intervention. So that's really interesting study and shows a lot of promise for my work too. Literature reviews flag up gaps. So I've got a few gaps here that I am going to look at in my research. There is very little research on Toastmasters. There is nothing on predictive analytics in Toastmasters, not surprising, or in professional development, communications training generally. No prior visibility. So again, this pathways, this learning management system is allowing Toastmasters International to actually be able to see how people are reacting, working with the materials. Are there projects that people don't continue with? Are there projects that people are more successful with? Do they engage more with the ones with videos? There's all sorts of things here about how they're engaging with the materials themselves that has not been available before. There are not many studies that combine self-reported data with trace data, so I think we're in a really advantageous position here that self-reported data is incorporated into each project in the Pathways system. And I think there's some exciting potential with the use of clusters here, particularly perhaps confident members self-assessing themselves well, and unconfident members and how their behaviour in the system and likelihood to renew or not might be impacted by that. So this gives me a number of research questions. This is the main one, if you like. How can we make use of predictive learning analytics in Pathways to identify members at risk of non-renewal? Maybe we can't. Maybe the data set is just so messy and inconclusive that actually we can't use it at all. That would be a learning. Not an exciting one from my point of view, but that would be information that would be worth having. And then building on that, to what extent do learners' demographics, self-assessments and behaviour in Pathways help predict a certain type of disengagement risk? So this gets back to the clustering that I was talking about and the nature of interventions. So are some members getting bored? Do some members think they know it all? Do some members think they're just not progressing? There's lots of potential here when we look at the data. So that's where I am with my research at the moment. Literature review done, loads of ideas, paws crossed I get to my second year and I can start looking into the data itself and start with a pilot study. Here's all my details here: personal email, work email, Twitter, and again that URL to look at my references in more detail. Clearly I did use more references in my actual literature review, but the ones on the site are the ones that I've spoken about today. Thank you.